Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, have you ever been in a situation where you're at work and you're having a healthy conversation, nay, a debate, and something somewhere has gone off the rails? All of a sudden, what was a calm, rational conversation has turned into a highly emotionally charged conversation that may or may not really be appropriate in the workplace. I want to talk about that. I want to simplify it down and how you as a people leader can help your team members when their emotions might be running high. And let's face it, communication skills have kind of gone by the wayside in the last few years. So let's talk about that as well. My special guest today, her name is Ammie Michaels, and she's the powerhouse behind Wolfpack HR. As a certified HR professional, mediator, and a facilitator, she's known for her playful professional development workshops that help individuals and teams understand and manage their behaviors and emotions to enhance their communication and collaboration, ultimately to foster connection. She's also the founding member of the Women's Impact Network, WIN, and she's committed to helping female entrepreneurs and business owners all across the U.S. achieve their goals. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Ammie Michaels. Hey, Ammie.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so pleased you're here. And like I said earlier, it just seems like ever since the pandemic, people's communication skills have gotten incredibly rusty, especially at work. Why do you think that is? And what's the first step to remedy it?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to say that there's a multifactorial reason for that. Many people are still kind of recovering from the last few years with the and trying to, get back to some sort of normal. They're trying to adapt to the changes that have happened over the past few years. That's one thing I believe that has impacted communication. Another thing that I think that has impacted communication is with these younger generations entering the workforce, they were primarily raised in a screen-driven world. And I think that might have created a little bit of a barrier or some sort of lack to like empathy for other humans, just because they've kind of lacked that direct face-to-face communication. And then with, the advancement of more technology and AI, just genuine human interaction is becoming more and more rare. And I think it's just causing disconnect in our society.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so how do we get back to focusing on human connection, both face to face, in person, or, when we work with our fellow teammates remotely? What do we do?
So I would say that there's two sides to that. As a leader, you have to be able to model the appropriate behaviors. And if you yourself struggle with self-emotional regulation, you might need to consider going through some training or, seeking some assistance yourself. Before you can expect that of your team members. So that's one step. If you have already done that, maybe you are able to regulate your own emotions, but you don't know how to help others do that. You may need to seek a professional to come in and either help you build up your skills in that area or help your team figure out, a little bit more about themselves. Typically, when I'm working with teams, it's hard to start the process unless you know where you're coming from. So we will usually start with an assessment, like a behavioral assessment or a personality test. So myself as a facilitator and a consultant knows what I'm working with to start. And then from there, I'm able to help determine the best route for the team and for the leader and help them begin to bridge that gap and improve communications and collaboration and ultimately connection.
It's so important. I think I want to point out what you said earlier. This is really at the core of emotional intelligence. So those that are listening out there, you might have heard this as a buzzword that's been spread around, or in some circles it's called EQ. But really, what it is getting back to just being a human again. The ways we used to communicate 10, 15 years ago when we weren't so device attached and device dependent. It's just, I feel like those skills have kind of got lost, and I think part of those emotional intelligence skills is active listening as well, being a good listener, and not trying to multitask while somebody is talking to you, right? Because there's nothing worse than feeling like you're not being heard. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say that absolutely 100% hit the nail on the head. And because you've probably heard this, most of our communication is nonverbal. And so when we aren't having those face-to-face interactions, we're not seeing people's body language and their facial expressions, and we are only getting text messages, or maybe you are hearing them, but if you are distracted, it's just you're not taking in all of those external factors that help us establish that communication.
Yeah. So let's dive into the how then. What are those basic human connection skills that we all need to relearn and train our teams on as well?
Yes. Well, that starts with connecting. And if you are part of a remote team, you are going to have more challenges than teams that are face to face in office and have that layer of connection. So as a leader, if you are managing a remote team, as much connection as you can possibly incorporate is going to be necessary. And so if you're having regular video meetings, make sure that everybody has their camera on, because you at least have the visuals without having the face-to-face connection. Even if it is through a computer screen, you're still going to be lacking like I said, the nonverbal cues that help us establish, where that person is coming from. It's the nonverbal cues, like the body language and the facial expressions, that provides the context to the communication. If it's possible to have regular physical meetings, there's a lot of remote companies, they're 100% remote, but they will have an annual retreat where everybody comes together. Having those in-person connections is really where you're able to build relationships. Those organizations that are fortunate enough to have on-site hybrid locations where the teams are able to meet regularly, start incorporating regular connection opportunities. I often recommend with the clients that I work with to do regular team building activities. And if you can do it outside of the office setting, it's better. It just kind of removes that stigma of the office, and people let their guards down more when they're not in typical office environment.
And, let me break this down for you because I think that you said a lot there. I feel like it is super important to have regular check-ins with your teams, especially if they're remote. I think there's a fine line for the interpretation of regular check-ins and micromanagement that you have to be very cognizant and aware of. Ultimately, for me as a people leader, when I've led remote teams, I know that I've hired the very best people. And so I trust implicitly that they're going to do the work that they're going to do. So I don't take personally a autocratic approach to, leading my teams because quite frankly, they're adults. And if we are doing regular check-ins, let's say a 5-minute stand up every single day, first thing in the morning, or 5-minute stand up Monday, Wednesday, Friday, as a quick little video call, to check in on how we're doing on progress, then that should be sufficient for you as a people leader to know, are they getting the job done? Are they hitting deadlines, et cetera, et cetera? Anything, say more than that, it can teeter onto that side of, oh, well, you don't trust that I can do the work, because you don't see me physically in the office, right?
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. That does establish breakdowns in connection and in communication if there isn't that trust factor. And I think that there has been a breakdown in trust in the employer-employee just dynamic over the last, I would say, maybe even decade or so. There's just not that strong relationship that you see. I mean, people don't stay with organizations for a long period of time, and it's not necessarily always on the employee. There's just a layer of trust that I think that has been removed in corporate, and it's changed the landscape. So I think as an employer and a people leader, if you want to have a strong team, you need to establish trust immediately if you want that employee to be retained long term.
Yeah. And I think as a people leader, how I build trust in those stand-up calls or the weekly team meeting, it's a very simple framework. There's 3 questions I ask. What did you accomplish yesterday or last week that you're proud of? What's on your plate today? And what roadblocks or challenges can I remove for you? That's it. You don't have to go into granular detail and fall into rabbit holes that turn into 1-hour meetings where you're going, oh my God, this is an email, not a meeting. It's like, what are you proud of that you accomplished? What have you got on your plate today? And what roadblocks can I help remove for you? And that shows your people that, hey, my people leader actually cares and listens to what I've got on my plate. And if I'm overloaded, this is a place where I can communicate it. And so he or she or they can alleviate that, because ultimately being overloaded is a roadblock from you doing your best work too, right?
Yeah. And as a people leader, one thing that I will say is, are you listening to your employees when they are communicating that they're overloaded and overworked and overstimulated? I speak with a lot of people that are still in corporate, primarily in human resources, and they just keep getting more and more stuff dumped on their plates, and more is expected of them. And they're telling their CEO or their COO, depending on, whoever they directly report to, that, they're drowning and they're not being heard.
Yeah. And when you're not heard, those little micro moments add up, they stack up, and it's like a volcano. That's what makes a person's emotions run high and eventually explode or an outburst in a meeting, because it wasn't that moment that actually tipped the barrel. It was the 10,000 moments before where they're like, I need help. And you're not responding to them, right?
Precisely. Precisely.
Yeah. So the other thing that you said earlier, and I really want to point this out because I think it's so incredibly important. When you have remote workers who refuse to put their camera on, how in the world do you build connection and trust and respect with that person? Like you have to make it a mandate, not all the time, but it has to be a standard for how we connect and communicate online, right?
I would say so. And like you said, that when you start putting mandates on things, then people that feels like a breakdown of trust on their part. And so I would say, things that I recommend to my clients is, at least if it's a meeting where, you're just doing a check-in, make sure that everybody has their cameras on initially. You say a quick hi, hello, give everybody a smile. But then again, I don't want to give advice that's going to, continue to support behaviors that create that breakdown. So as a leader, I would fully communicate what the expectations are for your team members, but also provide them the reasoning why. Explain it as I'll give a good example. I recently had to go to my bank. It's a new branch. They just built it. And they don't have any human tellers on site. And so you go to this wall. And so it feels like you are talking to a wall. And to me, if you're shutting your camera off, the person on the other side, there is no humanness to it. So it just, even if you are aware that there's a human, subconsciously, it does something in your brain. And it just removes that human element. So that's when I see people start getting in Teams or whatever it is for an internal messenger, it's a lot easier to send off a nasty message within Teams because nobody has their cameras on, and you're not going to see the sting of that message popping up and the person reading it.
Yeah. And I have been in meetings before where one person was just notorious for leaving their camera off. And afterwards, like my teams would talk about it and go, gosh, it just feels like I can't trust that person. I feel like they are hiding something. And that was a general consensus from the room. And, who knows, they might be, on the go in their car, juggling with kids, doing things that, cause them to not have their camera on, which I get it. We're all human. But keep that in mind. If you are a person who, 9 times out of 10 keeps your camera off, just what Ammie was saying earlier about majority of communication is those nonverbal cues. Remember that people need to see your face, even if it's just for the first 5 minutes of a meeting. So pull yourself out of the comfort zone and turn that camera on, because that will help you ultimately build more trust with your people leader, but with your cross-functional teammates as well, right?
Exactly. And another thing that I'll add is with the advancement of AI in so many industries, already being affected and disrupted, I would say that just makes any profession or professional who wants to advance in their career, they might be a little more leery as to whether or not their industry could be disrupted. I would be doing everything that I could to increase my skills and make myself visible and as valuable as possible to my leader. If I did not want if I didn't want my job replaced.
Yeah. And, I think also, when you are in the space where AI is starting to become more in the workflows and the tools are being adopted more at your companies, how do you think that's going to affect people's emotions at work? Do you feel like people are maybe at a fearful place that they are going to lose their jobs, and that's also causing the volcano to rise and rise and rise? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say that it could be a possibility. There might be people that think, oh, there's no way that my job could ever be replaced by a computer or a robot. But we're seeing more and more the capabilities of technology is amazing. So I think there does need to be a good balance in the workplace that might potentially also be causing some further trust issues anytime a company adopts new technologies. It does cause some frustration amongst the workforce because maybe they just had to learn a new system. Now they have to learn a whole new system again. And um, I think that would be a good conversation for a healthy debate. I can't speak to everybody, but I myself have been replaced in my roles prior to being in human resources because of technology.
Yeah.
I think you just need to, it's not going to go anywhere. So embrace it to the degree that you can. And maybe have a conversation with your people leader and ask, how maybe the next time they make a decision in regards to technology or AI, maybe volunteer to be part of the implementation team so you can learn that technology and adopt it into your role and make yourself more valuable that way. So it can be like a partnership.
I think that's very smart. Ultimately, I am pro AI with ethical boundaries and good governance. I think AI can help us as an assistant, as a co-pilot to do our jobs better and more effectively. But you're absolutely right. I think getting involved at your company's task force or AI invention labs, just so that you can become more aware of the innovations that are out there and how the company can start to integrate them rather than, being in a fearful state or feeling like you have no control. So let's kick it back to being a team leader. Now, you notice one of your team members' emotions are running high. They're running hot in a meeting, or their tone of voice is snippy, or they're just you notice something is not right. How do you, as their people leader, approach them to gain understanding and help to diffuse the situation with a bit of empathy?
Yeah. And so every scenario is going to be different. But I would say most people leaders have a pretty good understanding of their staff. This is one area that I tend to be brought in to help with. My company is called Wolfpack HR. And so we refer to these particular individuals that typically are known for not being able to manage their emotions. We call them the werewolves of the pack. And, they might be highly skilled and valuable to the organization, but they tend to leave everybody walking on eggshells and afraid to provoke them because of their wrath when they're upset. And this behavior does lead to breakdowns and disconnection within the team. So if you are a people leader and you know that you have somebody on your team like that, that scenario is going to be a little bit different than if you have a team member who typically is more level-headed and calm, that's suddenly lashing out or having behavior problems. I would say those two scenarios do need to be handled a little bit differently because it could be a difference between somebody's typical personality versus maybe there is something happening that is affecting that one individual. So either way, you would need to have a conversation directly with the employee, but I would do it privately, not in front of the rest of the team.
Yeah. Let's break this down because I think this is really, really, really important. So the person who suddenly lashed out, but it's not their normal behavior, are you suggesting maybe connecting with them again privately, not in front of everybody else, but just going, hey, Sally, I noticed that you were a little bit different in that last meeting. Hey, what's going on? Is everything okay? Something like that? Or is there a different way to phrase that first conversation?
No, I think that would be a good way to go about it. Not necessarily coming at it from an information gathering standpoint versus, you don't want to make them feel like they're being called out.
Yeah.
You want to definitely make sure that you're approaching it from compassion and providing that empathy to try to get to the root of it and, connect with them directly.
And so then they say to you, oh man, I just had a horrible morning this morning. I got a flat tire. I got a ticket on the way in, or my kid drove me crazy. And we had an outburst this morning. And that's what caused it. then what? What do you say as the people leader?
Yeah, I would say if it got to that point and they're all of a sudden lashing out, that it probably wasn't just that morning. I would say that they're probably suffering from a level of burnout and maybe they don't recognize it.
Mm-hmm. And so then what would you suggest? Because I think sometimes receiving feedback is a little hard. People fear, oh no, if she thinks I'm burned out, then that means that I'm easily replaceable and that she's looking to, blah, blah, blah. There's that whole inner dialogue that throws them down a negative Nancy rabbit hole, right?
Yes.
But how do you support them in an empowering way and be a true people leader that helps coach them through this difficult patch?
Yeah. Well, one thing that you can do is maybe just share with them what your experience of them has been. So always highlight their positive aspects. And then, you could always, once you've established, what it is that is working, then you can direct the conversation in a compassionate way to areas of improvement and areas of growth.
Great.
And get feedback on, where it is that they feel that they can get the most support, whether that be maybe they do need to take a PTO day, a mental health day. Maybe it's something within their team where maybe the workload could be restructured. But it would have to be a conversation where you could come up with win-wins on both sides.
And have a moment for accountability and follow up. You say, okay, now we've had this conversation today. I'm going to go find you those resources and point you in the right direction to, XYZ solution. And let's set a date in our calendar for you and I to chat again, because then it gives them accountability to go do the thing. But it also, if there's anything that's sitting on your shoulders as the people leader, you also have accountability to do the thing as well, right?
Absolutely. Setting that follow-up meeting holds both parties accountable and also gives time for reflection as well to have an additional follow-up. Maybe there are factors on one side or the other that will come to light in that time between the initial meeting and the follow-up.
All right. So we've talked about the one-off person, more or less, and want to talk about the werewolves. Wow. Gosh, what do you do with these people? I have experienced these people in my career. And I just, besides smiling and trying to say good morning to them every single morning and break down the the wall that they've built up around them, it's sometimes very flabbergasting.
Yeah. I've experienced this with multiple teams, and it is very exhausting for the team members. And so it's not a quick, easy solution because, as you imagine, these individuals have had these behaviors probably most of their life. So it does take time and multiple steps of coaching and working with them. And ultimately, it's changes that they need to be open to making. You can't change somebody else. They have to change themselves.
And so is it best to kind of frame it again, so they don't get on the defense, that you go, gosh, I've been noticing in this meeting that the communication is real weird. There's a tense air in that room, and we're struggling to get work accomplished. Are you noticing that? And then they respond, and however they're going to respond. Oh, it's great. Nothing wrong here, but then ultimately talk about like the company, how the company is struggling, or this team is struggling because there's some weirdness in this meeting, and approach it that way so that they don't get, so it's not like, hey, you're a terrible person. And, you're really hard to work with. Like, no one's going to respond well when you say something like that, right?
Yeah, no, you don't directly say, "Oh, you're the werewolf."
I heard this podcast, and guess what? You're this person.
So there's one thing that I will always kind of bring up a story,
Mm.
and it's an old. I don't know if it's an urban legend or uh, if it's a true story, but it's the tale of two wolves. And so a Cherokee was talking to his grandson, and the grandson said to his grandfather, "There's a war within me between two wolves. One is good and one is bad. How how do I know which one wins?" And the grandfather said, "The one that you feed." So how I incorporate this in the meetings that I have with the teams that I'm working with is um, I will list out the negative aspects or behaviors under the evil or bad wolf, and then the positive aspects and characteristics under the good wolf.
Mm-hmm.
And have them self-identify those behaviors within them that they see that they're regularly living out in their lives.
Mm.
That's kind of a starting point to how do we start replacing some of those negative behaviors and patterns with the opposite.
I like that. I like the idea of self-assessment first because it's so hard when somebody else is trying to give feedback to you, and maybe you're the toxic person, maybe you're the hi, I'm the problem, it's me, right? And that's the last thing you want. You immediately get on the defense when you feel like somebody's pointing a finger at you, with their words or otherwise. I like the idea of a self-assessment, and then bringing it back to the common good. What are we trying to accomplish here? And how do we get there? What kind of attributes and skills and emotional intelligence skills do we as a team need in order to get to where we want to go, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like this is a very detailed and deep conversation, that there's so many more steps to this. After they've done a self-assessment, what would happen next? It's again, kind of having those one-on-one conversations, coaching them through a process to improve.
Yeah. So if this is going to be, from the people leader standpoint, absolutely want to, once they are starting to do some self-reflection and self-identification, then you can work with them on ways to start working on emotional intelligence. And there are a lot of resources and courses available, but in order for there to be true change, you do have to get that buy-in. And so establishing, what's in it for them
Yeah.
to be more of a team player and to buy into the company vision and ultimate goal, they have to realize what the benefit is for them, because it's going to be a lot of work that they're going to have to do.
100%. Well, Ammie, I love this, and I love the concept of the two werewolves, and everything that you've got with Wolfpack HR. If you guys are curious about the work that she's doing out in the world, you can check out our website at wolfpackhr.com, or also AmmieMichaels.com. That's AMMIE Michaels.com. We'll put the link in the show notes for all the resources we talked about today, including how to connect to Ammie on LinkedIn, which is a great way to, connect directly and see if her HR consulting can help your team in this very, very difficult and necessary skill set. Incredibly important. You also provide guides for leaders, and you have ebooks as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will have some resources available on both of my websites, actually.
Well, we'll make sure those links are present for you guys. Again, the simplifiers.com is where you can find it to get all the links from today's show notes. So as we wrap up, Ammie, there's a couple of questions I like to ask that we ask everybody that's on the podcast. First and foremost, tell me what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
Yeah, so one book that definitely poked holes in my belief system and challenged me very deeply was Maybe It's You by Lauren Zander. It is a heavy read because you will be doing a lot of self-reflection.
Ooh, it's interesting. Tell me more about this.
Yes. So I actually started reading this book probably about a year ago, and it works through 12 different aspects and areas of your life. So I would recommend maybe just tackling a couple aspects at a time, and focus on the areas where you feel you need to make the biggest shifts or changes. It's gonna make you think.
I love it. We will link this book up in the show notes. You guys can check it out over at thesimplifiers.com. Tell me, who is one person that you know in your network you just feel is up to brilliant things? If we could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast. Who would that be?
That would be Sasha Walton.
Okay.
Is
Yeah, tell us about Sasha.
She is doing some great things to help female entrepreneurs really get, she's, in my opinion, kind of simplified getting visibility in the online market space, with so many people kind of stepping into entrepreneurship or solopreneurship. She has tons of resources and tools available, courses, and she's great at connecting people also. She's a great human.
Wonderful. We love good humans here at the podcast. So we'll link her up in the show notes. If you guys are curious about Sasha, you can also find her there at thesimplifiers.com. So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
Oh, I am grateful for this podcast and for all the other great connections in my network who are doing good things to make a positive impact in the world. Mm. If I think Michael Jackson said it best, look at the man in the mirror. If you want to change the world, it's got to start with you.
I love that. So someone somewhere is listening to you and I right now, and maybe they are struggling a bit as a team leader and a people leader because they have got some real problem children on the team. They have a big werewolf that they just don't know what to do next and are feeling a little frazzled by it. What's one thing you could whisper into their ear right now just to encourage them in this moment?
I would say start by giving yourself a hug. Mm. Because when you get connected to yourself and you love yourself, you're able to show more love to your people.
Ammie, I love that so much. Thank you so much for your time today.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.